There you go. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the call. Some of you have already heard me say this, but we'll repeat it for the recording. I'm Leo Kowalski, the program director for the PA Solar Center's Get Solar program. We are really excited to have everybody part of this webinar. This is a labor of love between us and folks at Connect, specifically Eric Robb, who's worked with us a lot. And I'll cue Eric up to speak on one of his slides coming up soon. But I want to talk a little bit about what the PA Solar Center is and what we do, and then we'll transition to the Get Solar program, and then the specifics of the Get Solar Connect program. But yeah, joining me on this call, I have my teammates, Amelia Egan and John Buddy-Radapan. Sharon Pillar, our founder director, I don't believe is on the call right now, but at some point will likely join. And without Sharon, none of this is possible. So real special thanks to Sharon for putting this all together. Well, 5 years ago, in the mission and vision of the PA Solar Center, 501c3 nonprofit, is to ensure that Pennsylvania becomes a leader in renewable energy again. 20 years ago, Pennsylvania was actually kind of on the vanguard of solar. We had a pretty progressive alternative energy portfolio standard at the time, and have done nothing about it since. And so now we've fallen pretty far behind some of our neighboring states. And so the PA Solar Center is meant to help usher some more positive change in the solar space and help Pennsylvania, take that role back as being a leader rather than, dragging behind. And we want to do this in a way that all Pennsylvanians can share in the clean energy economy. Beautiful thing about solar is it's a very mutable, very flexible technology. You can scale it from a single solar panel on a shed or a chicken coop or a small building to utility scale solar and everything in between. So it's a really versatile technology, and that's what makes it, I think, so democratizing, because it's such a potential to get in the hands of anybody who's interested. So that's why we really believe in this concept of all Pennsylvanians. It's not just actually getting physical infrastructure into buildings or in the hands of folks, but also using solar to defray some of the scaling costs of energy. We're increasingly becoming more dependent on natural gas in the state, as previously from coal. And when you're really dependent on one energy source, particularly one that is, politically implicated in its price and has like global ramifications, we're really at the behest of forces outside of our control, which is what makes solar, really appetizing in this current condition. We're supported by the foundation community pretty substantially in the Pittsburgh area. We have some support also from organizations within the solar industry. So we have our, terawatt sponsors, I want to call it, specifically BI Group, EIS, and LeMay Foundation, solar adjacent with LeMay. But these are organizations, these industry organizations that support our work. It's really exciting to us that they're here and that they're willing to see the value of us as a nonprofit coming in and working with organizations to do education and to find pathways for them to go solar. The way we want to accomplish these goals, lofty goals that we set for ourselves, is to transform, educate, and advocate. So we really want to both work in the very tangible way, which is what we'll talk about with Get Solar and helping organizations get their solar arrays up, but also to raise public awareness and to provide resources passively to folks online so that they can pursue solar in their own way. With outreach, public awareness, this really takes a form in with Sharon, our founder director, and our director of government affairs, Matt Mahoney, working on a couple different pieces. One, they're working with policymakers and educators. I guess that's more on the next slide, but we have a couple programs that they're offering. We have the Watts and Learn webinar series, which is a monthly series covering a variety of solar energy industry topics that are usually relevant to the day. So we've covered recently rural energy financing, because the USDA REAP program increased substantially the grants that they were offering because of the Inflation Reduction Act. And they've covered solar recycling recently, and decommissioning of solar. So every month there's some really amazing topics that they cover, and they bring in guest speakers. That's available on our website, and we can also, if folks are interested, send you a link to follow what program is coming up. And you can follow and decide if you want to attend those webinars. We also have an insolation map tracking the solar that's going up in the state, like large commercial projects. You can see from the little thumbnail that that's significant cluster of solar energy in the southeastern side of the state, and a little bit in this area, the Allegheny County area, and then not really much anywhere else. And that's something we're working to improve. The idea of all Pennsylvanians having access to solar energy, you can see that's just really not the way it's being distributed right now. And there's some structural things there, and there's ways that we can work together to improve that map. We also have a solar developer directory. County by county, you can click through to see what solar developers, qualified NAPCEP certified solar developers are working those areas and what kind of projects that they cover. We have a newsletter, the Lodestar Press, and we also do an award ceremony quarterly, the Lodestar Award, where we highlight solar leaders in a community, folks that have been on the vanguard of the solar industry or in like the adjacent industries who've been trailblazers in this space. Policy and education advocacy. This is, I mentioned before, Sharon and Matt do a lot of work here helping our legislators and civic leaders understand the really tangible benefits of solar and how they could help improve both that portfolio standard and local zoning and land use guides. Those are the kind of things that they're working on, and significant part of what makes solar work in the state. And Walking the Walk is the Get Solar program, what you're all here to learn about and discuss. Get Solar, Galvanizing Our Energy Transition Through Solar is an initiative that provides a streamlined process for organizations to pursue solar start to finish. We believe that providing these trusted tools and resources, we can make going solar a lot easier for organizations, because it's honestly not super straightforward, particularly for public organizations that have a lot of complication in the finance and the decision making. Who does Get Solar serve? Right now, it's pretty much everybody but residential customers, which we're working to develop, but it is a very large chunk of the pie that we are not totally ready to handle. But right now, pretty much if you're not a resident, we have some support for you. We select businesses and nonprofits pretty much passively through referrals through our website, through our Get Solar Trailblazers program. Folks can reach out to us anytime for your organization, and we'll do a high-level assessment for you. Depending on the complexity of the assessment, we do have a fee structure for feasibility studies that are sometimes we get connected to organizations that have a huge campus, like literally hundreds of acres and properties, like retirement centers. We do need to spend a little bit more time investigating, but typically if you're like a small nonprofit or whatever, we can get something back to you relatively quickly. And if you're interested in joining the program, we can move you through. For Get Solar communities and for like this program, the Get Solar Connect, we're working with a cohort of individuals that have a shared community or shared geography in the case of the communities program. And we waive those feasibility study fees and the application fees because we're working with civic leaders or community leaders to identify those projects. And it's more of a collaboration between us and the community to bring those projects in. That's been a program. We're starting round 3 pretty soon, but that's been a really exciting program to develop out over the last 2 years. Get Solar Schools, which the next slide covers briefly, is a partnership with us and Generation 180. So I know a lot of schools and municipal government often go together on solar projects, or at least confer on these things, because there's a economy of scale sometimes that's present that works really well, and you have some shared interest and needs. So if you are interested or you're connected to a school that may be interested, this would be a really great program for us to connect you with. Generation 180 is very good at doing outreach and connecting schools with the basic resources of understanding solar and building some consensus internally, while we're doing largely working in the technical space, as we would with this program, actually doing the solar analysis and helping figure out financing and running a competitive bid. We have Get Solar Farms and Get Solar Faith on the horizon, working with some organizations that serve those communities. So if either of those are kind of in your wheelhouse, just keep following the space. And then just a slide about Generation 180 and our program with Solar for Schools. This, for most folks, you'll be familiar with North Allegheny School District. We're actually waiting on Friday. We'll be getting the first wave of proposals for their Franklin Elementary site. So that's the first school to go through it, and we expect plenty more. And here is where I tee up Eric to speak a little bit about how we got connected with Connect and why we're moving through this program.
Thank you, Leo. Yeah, so obviously a lot of you know, if you've been involved with Connect, that we had worked for a couple of years on exploring the idea of climate action. So that involved, identifying what sort of risks we had to what sort of actions that we wanted to take, and then creating climate action plans. We decided that it made more sense to make climate action plans together, which is where the regional scale Connect Climate Action Plan that is inclusive of all the different municipalities that we work with, now up to 40, came from. And so what's written into that plan, I believe goal number 2 beyond energy savings was explore renewable energy sources and put those on our buildings, encourage those in our communities, and encourage our residents to put that on their residential dwellings in order to save them money and decrease their reliance on more volatile fuels, right? And so that's goal number 2 was to put renewable energy, mainly solar, in this state. And because it's a plan for local governments, we wanted to know from you what sort of barriers that you guys had on actually getting there, right? So like Leo had said, it's not a straightforward process, and a lot of you had been involved in figuring out whether you wanted solar was right for your building or your park or your property already. But I knew that a lot of you had been asking that more and more, especially as funding came down, you wanted to know whether you could take advantage of the opportunity. And so that was one. You didn't sometimes know where to start. But the second thing was that as a part of the climate action plan, you guys wanted to focus on your municipal assets, right? You wanted to focus on municipal property, but you needed the technical assistance. You needed capacity is always a problem with local governments, big and small. You always need more hands to do more things. So you guys said that you wanted that, and you wanted to understand the funding mechanisms. And so these are all things that we had gathered through the creation of the climate action plan. And so I had been searching for an opportunity for our local governments to actually go through with the process rather than talking about it, right? And rather than leaving it on the table, especially with all the funding that's coming down. So Leo, I already mentioned this in my introduction, but Leo had reached out from the Solar Center saying that, we provide these different services. I wonder if we should connect sometime. And I was very happy that I returned that call because it provides municipalities with those sorts of things that you said that you all wanted. That's what the Get Solar program does throughout all the different iterations of it, whether it's faith or communities or businesses. But now we realized that we had an opportunity here to do the same thing for municipalities. And since we have a big collection of municipalities here that all want the same thing and are best at talking about it together, instead of separately over the next couple of years, we'll jumble up, we'll group everybody together and we'll talk about this all together and do this all together, and we'll see what comes out of it. And so we wanted to explore local solar for governments. And so that's where the Get Solar Connect program came from. And so we wanted it to be, unbiased, which is perfect. We wanted it to be low cost for municipalities to not have to go to a consultant and find all this information or find it themselves. And we wanted you to be able to talk together about it, be a part of a group and talk about what the ins and outs of it and the barriers and the successes together. And so we set up an application process and we open a program, and we'll see where that goes. But I have right there, I'm sure Leo will talk about when the deadline is, but it will be at the end of the month here. This is just the informational webinar, and I'm excited to see all of you on the call that I've already talked to about this. And as far as the recording goes, this is also for everybody else that could not make it today to listen to all of this. This will be accessible for all of the governments in Connect, and you're all welcome to apply by the 28th, this program. So with that, I think that's it. I'll turn it back over to Leo.
Great, thank you, Eric. It's been a really wonderful partnership and collaboration so far. And I think it's really just the beginning of what we're going to try to do together, working with Connect. And the organizations within. But I do want to mention too that the application date of April 28th is really a completed application document, but you have until May 12th to provide the set of signed letter and intent, which we know there's some decision-making time for municipality that might require a little bit extra, some additional days on the back end. So we just wanted to, by 20th, we just want to know that you're interested. And by signing that application, or like by providing an application, it lets us start to prepare. We understand what properties you're exploring. We have a little better sense of your organization. And then you have a couple of days after that, close to 2 weeks, to get the rest of those materials in if you needed to get it signed and approved by council or whatever. So you just want to make sure that you understand, like, April 20th is coming around the bend quickly, but you don't have to have everything in by that point. So here's the thing, it's really great time to go solar. A year ago, this would have still been worthwhile exploring solar with the municipalities, but so much has changed since then that solar is really a lot easier to make sense of financially quickly, which is really the thing. Solar has always made sense financially if you're willing to spend the time or defray your costs, through loan financing or whatever, and pace it out and start getting that return. In some instances, it would take for a nonprofit organization 10, 11 years, particularly if you're financing yourself. But the financing has really changed significantly. And two major factors, the utility costs have risen dramatically last year, which is not a good thing, but it does make solar a little bit more sensible. In some utility markets, it's gone up as much as 80%. Now, some of those costs will settle a little bit, but they'll never go back to where they were before. And I don't think organizations and municipalities, taxpayers have really anticipated that significant of a leap. So that's one thing that makes solar, I think, a lot more appealing right now. And the other is the Inflation Reduction Act passed, and it provided a lot of really interesting financing tools, particularly for nonprofits. And we'll cover that in a moment, but that's really changed the financing for solar substantially since just the beginning of last year. And I should say right now, we're working through the Inflation Reduction Act. All of the rulemaking is not out yet. The legislation is, and we have Matt, our Director of Government Affairs, is pretty amazing at digesting all of that material and turning it into something useful for our team. But we're still waiting on some of the rules to be implemented. So when we speak about the Inflation Reduction Act, just know that there's a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of nuance still left to unpack. But as we move through this process, we should have everything we need by the time any of your organizations are looking to actually do something tangible. Little note on that electricity rates. You can see here, this is actually a pretty old slide. I think this is from maybe the end of last year, actually. I haven't gotten the updated numbers, but utility market price increase is pretty substantial. And this little graphic represents really the main problem, which is that as we move through the future, our dependency on natural gas in this energy market is going to be substantial. So when you have 70% of your electricity and your thermal energy similarly dependent on one resource, and that resource is a global resource, it's subject to anything that happens around the world. And we're seeing that right now. The price is very volatile. And the brilliant thing about solar is domestic, and it is most active and most available and usable during the peak energy load times for our utilities. So it has some offsetting ability in that space too, in terms of cost. So we really do need to get an increase in solar, even if it's not distributed. I mean, we do need more solar in our grid to prevent this from getting out of control. So the Inflation Reduction Act, if folks are familiar with this, I apologize, you're going to hear more about this, and we'll talk about it a ton, but this is a huge deal. So the first thing it did was create, it elevated the base of the solar tax credit, the ITC. This has been around for a long time, been up until this point only available to for-profit entities that have taxable income. But they've moved this tax credit back up to 30%, which is where it was originally many, many years ago. And they added a couple of bonus riders that can elevate this from 30% to some cases 60%. This all won't be necessarily relevant to organizations on this call, but that 30% is because they added what's called a elective direct payment And the direct payment option for the Inflation Reduction Act allows tax exempt organizations to claim a benefit that would be the equivalent of the tax credit they would receive if they were not tax exempt. And this, as we understand it right now, again, all the rulemaking is not out, but this is going to be more or less a tax refund, like an income tax return, in the way that it's going to be unfolded. So there'll be some kind of application from the IRS that you will fill out at the end of your fiscal year, the fiscal year that you not necessarily complete the solar, but contract it and pay a certain amount. There's some processes that you could do to not actually have it completely up and running, but still claim it in that tax year. So in that tax year, you would you'd fill out this form, and then they would process it, confirm it, and send you a check. So that's how we understand it right now. Again, that 30% base is available. You have a domestic content bonus that right now is probably not really valuable because the domestic content that's outlined in the legislation will likely be more expensive than the tax credit. But as things change in the industry, that could become a more appealing piece of this. Energy community is a big one for us. We just actually got the formal maps fairly recently, as of last week, and we're still unpacking that. We'd have to go through everybody's address by address, but some of the communities in this call will be available for another 10% on that 30% for being a community that has been impacted substantially by energy production and energy systems over the last couple decades. So there's a little bit of nuance here that we'll explore with each individual organization. And then the other one is low income community bonus credit. And this is dependent on some census tract data that we are not 100% sure what they'll be using. But the idea is that if you're in a low income community, that there's another 10% bonus. So it's possible that folks on this call or folks that are watching this webinar later would be eligible to 50% cost recovery, just straight up. So that's a significant change in what's available for solar finance. To be able to recover half of the price of the solar does a lot to make it more accessible to pretty much any organization. And I'm just going through this at a very high level because it's something that will impact with everybody individually, because the tax credit availability is going to really come down to your physical address. That it's kind of covering it in broad strokes is really the best we can do right now, and then working with you individually to understand what's available is kind of what we'll do as we move forward with this process. The other tool that's been available for a long time for municipalities is the power purchase agreement. So a power purchase agreement is basically a three-party arrangement where you, as the host site, where you would be the physical location of the solar, and then the purchaser of the energy from that solar, but another entity, a for-profit entity, would own that system. And the reason this has been done for a long time is because those organizations can commodify those tax benefits, which includes actually depreciation of the asset that you would not be able to do regardless of the Inflation Reduction Act. But they're able to commodify those pieces and provide the solar either at a discounted full purchase price after 5 complete tax years, or you enter in a long-term agreement up to like 25, 30 years in some instances, where you're just paying a reduced electricity rate and they always own the system. And this is appealing beyond the fact that prior to this was the only way to get any of these tax benefits to a nonprofit. It can be appealing because you are not ever responsible for the operations and maintenance of the hardware. So you agree to basically lease your land and buy the energy at a set rate, and then you don't have to think about it anymore. It's somebody else's responsibility, and they are incentivized and required to do all the downstream maintenance and to make sure it's operating in its peak efficiency. So you don't think about it, which can be very appealing for the municipality, especially small one. The cost savings versus purchasing the solar and finding a way to finance it, it's definitely worse. You are sharing some of the savings with another organization, so it will not be as beneficial, but it does stabilize your price. The power purchase agreement will lock in your rate for that entire term. It'll be spelled out year by year exactly what it is. So many of you are already familiar with doing supplier agreements or collective agreements to reduce your electricity rate. It's a very similar construct, except for it's solar in your backyard, and you have a fixed rate for a very long term that you would just not be able to achieve through the supplier agreements. and we can definitely answer questions about these as we move forward in the question and answer section. So if folks do have questions about this, you can also type it in the chat, and John and Amelia will support your answer while we talk through. But here's just an example of a long-term power purchase agreement that we at the Solar Center helped create. This is CCAC North Campus that came into our Get Solar program round 2. They have a 28-year power purchase agreement. They did not spend any money on the solar at all upfront. I hope I said that earlier, but I apologize. You are not spending any money up front under these power purchase agreements. It's all financed through the a third-party investor. So that's the other appealing thing, that you're not immediately responsible. The expectation for this system when it was installed was that they would save right around $800,000 through the life of it by getting that reduced electricity rate. Since electricity rates have increased dramatically since then, I suspect that number has moved significantly. So they timed this out very well. They locked in a rate at a very low time, and we'll enjoy that for the next 28 years. The other model I mentioned briefly was this partnership flip, where an organization is going to be the full owner after a minimum of 5 years, usually in year 6. They have the option to buy out their power purchase agreement, or this can be baked into the cake up front, that they prepay some arrangement. This was a thing. This was our first project actually through the Get Solar program, Global Links, which many of you might be familiar with, medical nonprofit in Green Tree that repurposes medical tools like your like insulin needles, those kind of things, to office furniture. A thing I never thought of before is dire need in places across the world. Like if you have a developing nation with a hospital that has almost no revenue, a thing that they just do without is having chairs for their doctors, because that's money that is taken away from their delivery point that they can't afford. So they actually distribute like shipping containers of everything you can think of to these hospitals all over the world and domestically that would otherwise just be going to the trash. It's a really cool organization that operates very sustainably. Their roof needed partial replacement. So through this power purchase model, they're able to replace the roof, get the solar, and in year 6, they'll be the sole owner of this. They're basically paying a slightly discounted rate up until the year, like year 6, when they do the flip, and then they're in the clear and the solar's there. So it was a really cool model. They did receive a grant through the Green Mountain Energy Sun Club that made that possible. And I should say that the rooftop solar isn't necessarily strictly a power purchase agreement thing. Like you can modify some of a roof replacement in certain terms under that tax benefit. And we can talk a little bit about that at the end. But just so you know, if you are thinking about replacing a roof on a facility, that could actually be a benefit to explore solar plus the roof at the same time. Here, I'm going to tee up Amelia, who put this slide together. Amelia's done a really great job of exploring this block grant that's kind of new to us, and can explain a little bit about what this means potentially for you folks.
Thanks, Leo. Yeah, so this is one of the funding mechanisms currently available for communities in Allegheny County. It has changed as of last week. So this is, again, something that is always evolving, that we can tell you our understanding as it is currently, but a lot of their guidelines are also being developed as we speak. So there are kind of 2 parts to this. There is the formula applicants and also the competitive grant applicants. The formula applicants already have received funding. They have a designated amount of funding. So as you can see in awardees in our region, Pennsylvania overall received a little over $3 million. Allegheny County received about $750,000, and Pittsburgh received a little over $300,000. So that will probably apply more specifically to PWSA and Alcosan, as far as where you two and those 2 entities can receive funding from this, but everyone else isn't necessarily defined. So everyone else on this call and in the Connect program will fall into the competitive grants program. So again, this competitive grants just launched last week. They would like to see concept papers that are due June 5th. There is some information on the website about concept papers. And they are looking for local governments to apply more directly to the state. The states are required to subgrant at least 60% of the funds that they receive to local communities. So that's going to be your best bet for getting some funding from this program. There's also some terms about they encourage entities to team up, so to speak. So for example, if a couple of these communities are maybe joint, or they don't have to be next to each other, but if you're doing some similar programming, looking for similar grants, and for example, working with us, we are an eligible entity for technical assistance. So there's some interesting programs they're trying to get people to work more closely together, but I would say the best bet is probably going to be applying through the state right now. There is a webinar coming up on April 18th from 2 to 3 p.m. and it is the very first webinar for this competitive grant program, and it's just the introductory. So I can send the link, or I think maybe John put it in the chat. There's a pretty clear like FAQ section on the website, and this webinar will be coming out soon. So this is in the information as we currently understand, and we're happy to work through this information as more guidelines come out and answer questions about your individual municipality.
Cool, thank you, Amelia. Appreciate that. Yeah, we're just working through this ourselves, so it'll be kind of a journey together, but it is really a wonderful opportunity, we think, to find some financing for these projects and maybe work collaboratively to find a more robust opportunity that would be available otherwise, and maybe save a little bit of work if we have multiple communities that are interested. Some kind of consolidation in that team up could be compelling. So as we learn a little bit more, particularly from that webinar, we'll kind of share that information with folks. All right. So the meat of it here, the Get Solar process, like what we would actually be working with you organizations on is pretty straightforward. It's 4 steps. The first is we do that high-level analysis, that feasibility study, to both, and I'll have some slides on this. It's going to get a sense of like where the solar actually could go, what that might look like, and then our best guess at the financial implications of that solar installation based on our experience with other similar projects and industry standards. If that seems appealing to the organization, we then do an RFP process. We put those projects out to bid to qualified regional solar developers. As municipal organizations, particularly depending on the size of your solar installation, that could draw a pretty far-reaching interest from solar developers. We tend to prefer and would like to work with in-state solar developers and regional solar developers, because part of that mission statement of developing the complete solar economy and keeping that robust in Pennsylvania. But we do not oblige folks to follow that if they do want to see a larger pool of applicants, which is the case with some of our projects. And I should note, on the power purchase agreement, size does implicate whether or not you can pursue certain levels of that. So the larger solar systems are more viable for those power purchase agreements. So I just kind of want to put that out there before I forgot. After we get those RFPs, or after we get through the RFP, we get those proposals from the solar developers. We consolidate, we make sure all the data points are there, and we provide you with some analytical tools to assess what you're actually seeing. So you get these proposals, they can all look very different. We make sure the solar developers give us everything under the same set of assumptions in as much as they can. Your same assumption about utility rates increases, and make sure they're using the same electricity rate for the organization. We provide you that tool to do the analysis across, and we work with you to understand and unpack it. So we'll host some calls with you to piece out every little bit of that so that you really do understand what you're working with. And when you decide to move forward or not with solar and how you move forward, you're making an informed decision. We are not going to influence your decision in any way. It's really important for us to be unbiased, and that entire process. We are a nonprofit with the mission to provide education. So we're not here to support any individual organization's role in this. We really do just want to give you the tools you need to make your own decision. And then that last step is just, you have a proposal you like, we'll help you develop a financing strategy to get it to completion. and move through that process. And that is as long as it takes to get you to a completed project. So we still have some organizations that have had complications for their solar. They have the will, the desire, financing, but some technical things or structural things have come through that have elongated that process. We've been working with them for some time. So we'll really stay with you through this whole thing. And so here's some examples of what we can do. This is a facility that many of you might be familiar with, but I'll kind of leave it to your imagination unless you zoom in and see that it says Franklin Elementary on it. We do this high level feasibility of identifying sites that have solar potential. So we have 2 roof segments and 2 ground mounts that, working with the organization we identified, could be viable. We take this and then we will model, in this next slide, we will use a design software called Helioscope that's used pretty widely in the industry. It's a pretty standard design software. We'll model out a practical solar array and through that do the calculations on likely costs and savings based on, again, size, industry standard, some other data points that we have. This data is not from that project. I wanted to make sure I used different things, so we weren't revealing too much about the Franklin Elementary project. But you can see from this, this is kind of the information. This is the kind of information we'll provide. We're looking at year 1 savings, 25 years, the full purchase price, the tax benefits you'll likely receive, production size, all that stuff. And it's very probably challenging for folks to really dig deeply into that cash flow, but we'll provide you with our estimation of that year-by-year cash flow, like when you're in the green for the system. This model here showing an organization that's just paying for it cash and then getting their repay back in year 9. So with no bells and whistles and a fairly large solar array, they're cash positive in year 9, which is actually pretty good for this is another nonprofit organization. And then they're set to make a substantial amount of money over the life of that. But there are other ways you can defray costs, and we'll explore that with you. We do all of the work through the solar developers. So we'll run that RFP, we'll interact with them. We'll obviously give you opportunities to talk about your project and host, walkthroughs and that sort of thing. But we're really going to take all that work off your hands. We know that municipal organizations are never just flush with human resources, that you're all probably wearing many hats, and some of you are doing this voluntarily or part-time. So we really want to take as much of that energy out of your hands so that you can focus on the things you need to do. And we present you with information that allows you to make decisions more easily. And that's true of really any organization we work with, but we do really understand that that's uniquely challenging for public organizations to go through this. This is actually an image from an older comparison tool that we use, but I still like it. Just again, showing what that looks like, apples to apples from different organizations. And we'll provide these resources and provide some more analytical tools to help you make your assessment. So as we mentioned earlier, Friday, April 28th would be the deadline to submit the application document, which is available on our website at pasolarcenter.org/getsolar. And I'll show you on another slide that you can we have a Connect landing page that has all the resources you need for this particular program. What we'd really like to have that April 28th deadline is that application document, recent electricity bills for any of the sites that you'd be exploring, and any other documentation you can provide, roof repair, blueprints, electrical infrastructure. Some of that stuff can come through by May 12th. We do really need as much of that as possible by May 12th to help pass on to the solar developers. Because once we get you into the program, we do try to run a really tight ship from there on to make sure that you're able to get the solar proposals and have all the information you need to make some of these deadlines. We have that June deadline for the block grants. Like, you really want to be able to have a fully thought out solar proposal if you're submitting for funding on it. So we do need to make this go very quickly from May 12th onward. And again, May 12th is when we need the letter of intent and the MOU. And the MOU for the Solar Center is really just like, while we're spending our time and energy through this program and we're waiving these application fees and the feasibility study, We do really want your commitment to work with us solely as the solar consultant, and not proceed, like look for bids outside of this program, et cetera, until it's completed. After we work through and help you do the RFP and understand what's at stake, you're free to do whatever you want to do, obviously. But while we're through the program, we would really like that commitment that you'll be fully supportive of it and trust us to help you get the resources you need. This is what it would look like to click through the website and just see, you know, under our Get Solar tab, Municipalities and Connect. That's where you can go to get all the documents you need, or you can type in this address or email me directly, and I can connect you with those documents digitally. On that page, we have a little pre-qualification. So if you're just thinking of it off the top of your head, you're interested, you can just boom, fill this form out just in 5 minutes during this webinar or afterwards or whatever. You just get us a sense of where you're looking to put solar at that address, and we can start doing some of this assessment work, feasibility work. And the whole thing is going solar can actually be pretty simple. We do make this a lot easier, and we do put in a lot of work to make this as user-friendly as possible. So I just kind of want to reiterate that there's an opportunity to explore this without putting a lot of your labor hours in. But also it's important, I mentioned we have the MOU, but there's no obligations or contracts. Like, you don't have to go through with a project through this program. You don't have to sign off on anything from the solar level. We just want to put you in a position to make something happen. And if it makes sense, it makes sense. If it doesn't, it doesn't. That's okay. And here's just a little bit more, the due date and just a quick analysis of what we will provide. I know we're at 2 o'clock, and some of you have to drop off. I appreciate your patience. We ran a little long, but I would love to field any questions right now, and Amelia and John will obviously be supportive as well. But if anybody still on the call would like to ask us any questions while we're still here, happy to field them. You can always reach out to us anytime prior to that application deadline, of course. Now, I don't get any questions. I assume I just did a really good job of explaining everything. It's perfectly clear.
I wanted to give them a minute to have any questions. So yeah, if you guys have questions, okay, good. Yeah, are you guys going to share this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll process the recording and post that, and then we'll also I'll share the PDF version of the slides with everybody as well. We'll probably just post it on the website, and you can just click through it. That way, it might be the easiest way to do it.
You have a question from Eloise.
Oh, in the chat. Oh yeah, so a reference point for a 500 kilowatt system. That's actually a really good point. So we'll start at this scale. The average household of solar is 7 kilowatts installed. And so then you start thinking about a normal, a small business, a small commercial organization, then we're probably closer to a 40 or 50 kilowatt system. So with the 500 kilowatt that we showed on the CCAC building, I think that was about 50% of their electricity use on that campus. So you can imagine the community college, not like an energy user the way that a steel manufacturer would be or something, but a fairly large energy user building. So that's a pretty large system, honestly. That's half a megawatt. The program that utilities have to provide and honor for solar is called net metering. So when you're consuming electricity, regardless of how much you're using at any given moment, if you're producing electricity through your solar, it runs your meter backwards if you're not just consuming it directly. So your solar is sized to be 100% of ideally 100% of your energy usage annually, not necessarily timed out so that you're using the solar in that moment. So that represented about half of their total electricity usage throughout the year. So it's a pretty substantial system, but they have a large flat roof, so they were able to do something pretty big. And the larger you go, that's a fairly large system for what we do. The economy of scale plays out a little bit better. Important note about that net metering is does not have to be tied to your building physically, and it can be up to 2 miles away from the electricity bill that it's offsetting. So conceivably, you could put solar in a field if you have one available that's not being used, and you could apply that to electricity bills within 2 miles, and any number of them, as long as you're the owner of all those. So we can do some interesting things with municipalities that have property and maybe don't have like a good building for solar, or if you have multiple municipalities clustered close together and there's one large site. We're actually working on a project like that in this region, where there's several small municipalities that are looking to reclaim a brown site with solar. So we can do some creative stuff in the space if you have the land.
And Leah, I was going to say, the helioscope for Franklin Elementary, if you go back to that slide, that's a 583 kilowatt system. So you need roughly 35,000 square feet for 500 kW.
Is this what you're mentioning?
Yeah, so right smack dab in, well, I guess if you include both roof A and B.
Yeah.
So both of those systems combined is 583 kilowatts.
Yeah. And if we did solar, all 4 of these solar sites for this school building, I think it's just around 80%. It's a little over 80% of their total usage. So that, again, that's a significant array covering, they're fairly large energy users. You can imagine schools do, particularly in terms of climate control in a building, like there's a lot of energy goes into that. So, you know, these are obviously larger buildings than probably a lot of you are working with, but we do have a lot of experience with smaller properties, down to like 5 kilowatt systems, like basically the size of a house. So we'll work within whatever range is necessary for your organization. That's worth noting. Like, if you don't think you're big enough for solar, like, let us figure that out. You know, let's help you understand what your exact opportunity is. Don't be turned away by that.
I have a follow-up question to go off of that. Yeah, so I got a couple questions from some municipalities that were interested in this. I'm not sure whether they put an application in or not, but my sense was like, what level of, I have it written here, what level of like completion does a property or site or something have to be to like receive some assistance from you guys? So like I got an example of, they were saying that they were planning on very soon building a pavilion. And I think they have some like designs of what that building is going to look like and schematics and stuff. But of course the building isn't there, right? So like what level of, you know, whether it's a property that has not been cleared off yet, or a clear property, or a pavilion that hasn't been built, like where do you guys draw the line as far as like, this isn't you know, in reality enough, this is too conceptual for us to really give you a good estimate of whether it works or not?
I mean, I think if you know the property is going to be built, like if you know this building's in the queue, like it's not totally completely like we want to put a building somewhere, and you have any kind of designs or modeling, we can start figuring out where the solar goes and how that could go together. And it's honestly a pretty good idea to do that. There's some engineering things that would advantage your solar if you have it in mind up front, like how the building's oriented, the shape of the roof, what kind of junk is on that building. Because if you leave it up to an engineer or architect that isn't cognizant of solar, doesn't care, they're just going to put stuff wherever it's convenient for them in the design on your rooftop, and that could preclude you to put solar in on the facility. So I think having drawings is a good start. Obviously it's difficult to model savings from that perspective, but that's not necessarily completely off the table. Like if we have bills from a comparably sized ratepayer in that area, then we could probably do at least a little bit of, you know, high level calculations on that front. So we can definitely tell you how much the solar would cost within a range, so you can imagine like the investment from the solar at that level. So yeah, there's some other infrastructural things for designing it that way that could save you money in the long run. But yeah, I mean, if it's conceptual, that's fine, as long as we have something to design off of.
Cool.
We had a really good question there, like Eric in the chat, about non-interrupted power. And it's worth noting that under very, very, very rare circumstances do you ever disconnect from, you know, utility when you're putting up solar. Typically this is an application applied to places that aren't connected in the first place, like if you got a cabin or something. But with net metering, with solar, like you're not switching off the utility power supply. You're going to be pulling solar energy from your array into your meter when it's available, and when not, you're pulling it from the grid always. So you're not disconnecting. You don't have to worry about that intermittent interrupted power flow. You can use solar to hedge against loss of utility power, though. Like that's a thing to explore with battery backup, which is becoming a much more viable financial decision. There are now incentives that are achievable through the Inflation Reduction Act to get battery backup, and there are much better commercial battery applications than there used to be. This is changing rapidly. So if any of your municipal buildings serve as a like emergency center, for example, we could maybe explore solar as a way to actually like, all right, well, if the power goes out, if Duquesne Light or West Penn Power, whatever, loses availability, well, we can bank for 12 hours, or we could do whatever under, what the design is. So it kind of flipping that question on its head, like we could actually go in the other direction, which is make you more resilient rather than worrying about intermittence. But that's not the solar. If the solar is not functional, you'll just pull from the grid. It'll be fine. Eric, did you have another follow-up question that was submitted to you?
Yeah, it's not related to the first one, but I got another question too about, a lot of times municipalities want to put a, for example, like a solar canopy or a solar roof, but they want it to be, they're not ready for electric vehicles yet, or electric charging station or something like that. But they know that eventually they're going to want to have those connections in place to connect those two systems, right?
Yeah.
What do you guys give any guidance on that, or as far as when these things are being designed or estimated, like what does that look like for a municipality? Because I know they'd like to probably have the option, but I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, laying out the design or the financials of the charging stations is not really something we have familiarity with, though we can definitely help work through that with the organization and with organizations that specialize more in that space. We definitely like the solar canopies. That's well within a real house. They are more expensive than your kind of classic array because you have to build a steel structure to support them. But there are definitely some incentives to do EV chargers, and those are coming from the Department of Transportation or the utility. Like you can imagine, the utility company loves people charging their cars with electricity, so they help incentivize and rebate it. They don't necessarily love that the solar is producing the electricity because then they're not supplying it. But there's some stuff that you can apply. So that takes a little bit more collaboration to make those things work, but that's totally achievable. And it's something we do want to be more involved with. These like holistic applications of solar are really where people, I think, need to be, and like organizations need to be. So we would love to participate in as much of those things. If we don't have a lot of experience with something, we're usually pretty geeky about learning. So as long as you're interested in that, we're happy to do it.
Great.
Cool. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, it's 11 past. I'll happily let you folks go. And you can follow up anytime, Leo at pasolarcenter.org or Amelia or John at pasolarcenter.org if you have questions. And we'll post this on the website under that umbrella, and we'll send out a notification to folks who've attended or who registered, and Eric will send through his distribution list. If you are interested in applying and you are having any difficulty with any of the steps or questions about timing of things, please reach out. We'd love to work with you and work through that. So don't let any of these things be a barrier. If you don't think you're viable for solar, let us figure that out. Let us help you. Don't like shut yourself off this opportunity. Like, don't overthink it. We'll figure it out, and we're happy to do that. Happy to work with you to decide that it doesn't make sense. Like, that's good too. So it's just better to be armed with like real knowledge.
This is a no-brainer. They're willing to do the work for you. Anybody that's listening, so take advantage.
Yeah. I'm so willing to make John and Amelia do it. I couldn't be happier.
Thanks, Leo. And thanks, Eric.
Thank you.
And thanks for everyone attending the call and also watching the webinar. Like Leo said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at any point.
Great.
Thank you, PA Solutions.
Thanks, Eric. So grateful.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.